right, for the 28th League, we have the Expedition. So this was the rebalance of Act 1, the removal of elemental immunities. Monster life has been increased by up to 46%. And tapering down to their same life at level 84. Pack size was buffed in later areas. And slightly reduced in lower areas. Added some new monster types. The balance changes. So evasion rating has been lowered to 15, previously 53. Characters no longer gain evasion rating per level. Game wide poison now does 50% more damage. Consecrated ground effect no longer grants 100% increased critical strike chance for hits against enemies on consecrated ground. Support gems were massively nerfed. Elemental immunities were very hard to achieve. Added a new arcane and a new prismatic gems. And then they linked the things that were linked to them. And then shield related skill gems now display their critical strike chance and attack damage at the top of the skill gem hover. For Xena mods, we had Fortune Favors the Brave, Abyss, Anarchy, Domination, Nemesis, Metamorph, a Ritual, and Delirium. Expedition. This league introduces 4 NPC characters from the Calguran Expedition, who came to Rayclass to excavate their ancestors' lost settlements. Using explosives, the players set them around the expedition site to unearth the monsters or treasures hiding underneath. After recovering artifact pieces from the expedition, you can barter or gamble with them for items. Calgurna equipment have a special defense stat called Ward, which shields the user from damage on the next hit they take and replenishes after a delay. One of the 4 NPCs from the Calgurna expedition will spawn in the area surrounded by various markers. Approaching them will allow you to start placing explosives to excavate the area. Any marker within the explosive range will unearth monsters or chests. The explosions detonate in the order you place them, and there is a maximum range between explosives. These are also remnants, which add mods to monsters and chests spawned from the explosions and all subsequent explosions. Gwyn sells unidentified equipment, which reveals its rarity and mods when purchased. Takes Broken Circle artifacts and Astrogali for restocks. Then there's also Tugan, Rog, and Danig. Rog was by far the most powerful one because he let you craft. Like, by far the most powerful one. If you knew what you were doing. He was gated, knowledge gated. There's a link to the Expedition League, the Expedition mechanic, as well as the logbooks. Reception and implementation. Expedition had a very poor reception, which led to the positive changes we got in 3.16. This was more to do with the massive balance changes than to deal with the league mechanic itself, even if it did feel similar to a bunch of others. Personally, I was surprised they implemented Expedition and thought if anything they would get the synthesis treatment and just have logbooks, which are fun and rewarding. So Expedition feels just like Blight and in kind of Ritual and kind of Ultimatum. You have a small area, you put things on the ground, you spend time doing things that aren't particularly active in an ARPG, and then you kill stuff, and then you had to spend time crafting. Now, Expedition did some things right as far as you could do the craft when you got back to your hideout, which was good, but the crafts, and there was rerolls, so you could actually sit there and craft and craft and craft and craft if you wanted to, using the rerolls and the currency changes and everything like that. I'm still kind of shocked that it wasn't like just logbooks, because I feel like logbooks are the best way to add Expedition into the game. Is the core Expedition, like specifically when we have time maps, like things like Expedition and Blight are so counterintuitive to players that aren't the fastest clear speed people. Like my buddy Orange, he is not his preferred play speed is like at a medium pace. And so I try to look at things like I play faster typically than he does. And I'm not the fastest. But to him, I seem fast. Is like, this seems fast to me, right? Like there's a clear differentiation between us. However, the thing that I see with him is that he likes the mechanics. He engages with the mechanics much more than I do. I'll engage with the mechanics I like a lot, but I kind of just like skipping mechanics for the most part. Like, and I think that's due to the feeling of bloat and feeling that there's too many mechanics, and there's the mechanics I tend to skip are mechanics that have extra steps in them. So any mechanic that is not well designed to work outside of any mechanic which does not function outside of the league as well as it functioned in the league, such as like Anarchy. Anarchy functions amazing. Anarchy is probably the best designed league they've ever had because it's the same when you randomly encounter it while playing through or in a map. It is the same experience that it was in the league. It's the exact same experience. It's the exact same reward types. Nothing changed. And that's why it was such a good league and why it was probably their best designed league ever, because it was their first league and they knocked it out of the park. It will always be relevant because it changes up exiles. And if an exile is starting to feel like they don't have a purpose, they can replace it with a new exile. And that's beautiful. Like, that's beautiful design. And it makes it where it can always stay relevant. And like, a lot of people realize when playing Delve that like some of the exiles are genuinely scary because they were killing people in Delve a lot. And like, that was like a stopgap for a lot of people, were rogue exiles of all things, which we don't think about necessarily all the time, because normally there's one or two of them that give us a bad experience. And it's hard to build a build that has basically is completely immune to all the rogue exiles because they're so varied. And that's what makes them fun, is that, yeah, I'm great against like 99% of them or 98% of them, but there's that 2% that, man, they can give me a problem. And that's great design. And I wish more leagues got that design. Expedition in League was great because you just knew it's worth stopping and just engaging with the mechanic for. Outside of League, I really enjoy the logbooks because then when I'm in the mood for really turning on my thinking cap and like trying to strategically place everything, I can do that. Same with blighted maps. Like, I enjoy those mechanics. I just think that they're at their best at the in-game content. And maybe that's just what players should experience, is the in-game version of that instead of the base version, which really doesn't function without the end game well. Because the base version of it is very unrewarding. And if it's just the logbooks, and I think that the worry is that they think that logbooks and blight maps are too rewarding. Maybe that's the worry. But if that's the case, just tone them down a little bit. I don't think they're too rewarding as it stands. But if you make it where it's optional fun content that you can choose to interact with, like, the more player agency you give players, the happier they are. And some mechanics work just fine without being locked behind their end game mechanic. Like, Metamorph now kind of works fine, even though interacting with Tane feels a little immersion breaking and like it's not needed. And I would rather just have the roaming metamorph, because like the roaming metamorph is just cooler in every way. It's more engaging, it's more exciting, and then there's like a genuine like, oh crap, there's a metamorph right there. And so you have to find a way of dealing with it, or like bailing. And so you have that option to consider. And there might not always be a bailout option. Like you may just have to fight it. And so I think the rogue metamorph type of mechanic is just a cooler mechanic than having Tane anyway. And I think logbooks are just a cooler mechanic than the base expedition. Like I think base expedition is fine. And I actually played like expedition mapping before the videos were made about it. And it was fun and I enjoyed it. And it was rewarding because I could sell logbooks if I didn't feel like running them. And that part was cool. Like I genuinely enjoyed like rolling it for expedition and basically forcing expedition. I enjoyed that in Scourge. However, I would have rather just had logbooks. Like every time I interact with Blight, I just wish it was a blighted map instead of the Blight mechanic, where it's taken out of the principal mapping experience and put into its own experience. I think it's just better. I think it's just more fun. Like, and I think that's because I enjoy the end game of Path of Exile a lot more than I enjoy the leveling portion. Like I deal with the leveling portion because I enjoy the end game, not vice versa. And I normally make multiple characters every league, and it's because I enjoy experimenting with different things. And I'll respec at least one or two of them into something completely different, just because it's interesting to me to try something that different. And it's weird that like now Detonate Dead is under like a lot of scrutiny, when Detonate Dead has always been good because of the way it's scaling. And it probably doesn't need nerfs. Maybe what needs to change is the way that we mitigate damage, so Detonate Dead doesn't feel like it's needed, would be my counter argument. Like I kind of already covered this in Heist when I talked about like why isn't Glacial Hammer good, and that would be the same argument here. So if Detonate Dead is the problem, why are other gems not being used in the same environment? If Detonate Dead is a problem because of the way it scales its damage, there's major flaws with Detonate Dead. Go kill Shaper with Detonate Dead, or go kill Cirrus, and you'll understand like there's flaws with Detonate Dead. Because those arenas have just a ton of mods in them, and it really lowers the Detonate Dead pool. And I'm sure that was intentional, but it makes it where it's like a struggle bus with those. And I know some people have been playing like Cremation Detonate Dead. Now that's a completely different mentality, because then you do have a very solid DPS with a potentially very high DPS. And I could see that being an issue, but at the same time, you're also playing it in extremely clunky playstyle, because then you're at a 3-button build, because you have to have some form of Desecrate triggering, you have to have Cremation triggering, and you have to have Detonate Dead triggering. And so you're playing a minimum of three different active skill buttons. And if you're playing that many active skill buttons, like, hey, go for it. Like, I think there's a reason that 1-button builds are 1-button builds, and there's a reason 2-button builds are 2-button builds, right? And 2-button builds should be more powerful than 1-button builds. And 3-button builds should be more powerful than, 2 or 1. And when you're playing the Warcry shenanigans, where you're hitting like 5 cries and then, slamming really big, that should also be more rewarding than playing a 1-button build. So I think there's tiers of difficulty to play, and those tiers should be rewarded, right? Like the strongest skill at any given time should be the one that requires the most amount of effort to happen. So there's nothing wrong with slam builds, one-shotting stuff, in my opinion, because you had to press like 6 buttons and all kinds of crazy setup stuff to do it. And if you're willing to do all that, then go for it. I'm not that guy. Like, I don't want to press, like, I don't want to have further issues with my hands than I already do. And maybe that's a defining factor, that it's okay for that to be the most powerful thing. It should be, because it requires so much effort. It requires so much effort. And it's okay for that to be really, really powerful, because it requires so much effort. And it's fine. It's perfectly fine. But anyway, you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will catch you on the next and last one. Have a great day, Exiles.